relationships and seesaws, they are really pretty similar. Some are big and some are small. Some are safe and padded, while others are dangerous and tall. There's strong ones, and not so strong ones, and too many others to count. But no matter the shape or size, they share one thing the same. They have to have two to work. And depending on who is part of the two, they could go nowhere, or somewhere further than intended. Or maybe they're matched perfectly, but their rhythm is, let's just say, less than splendid. Regardless of the case, one thing's for sure. To do it alone isn't fun. It's downright impossible. So let's talk about how to do it better. Seesaw. How do you balance your relationships?
This new series at Worship Uncoiled, and it's all about boundaries and the importance of having healthy boundaries in our relationships with other people in our lives. Healthy boundaries in relationships in our families, healthy boundaries in our relationships with our friends, healthy boundaries in relationships with our acquaintances. Healthy boundaries are super, super important. And last week we simply focused on this idea that I really, really want you to grasp. It's this: you are worthy of boundaries in your relationships. You are worthy of boundaries in your relationships. Jesus said this. He said, the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Second is just like it. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Don't miss that last part. As you love yourself, we're called to love ourselves. And one of the ways that we can love ourselves well is to set up some boundaries to protect ourselves from some situations that may be harmful to us. Boundaries are really, really important. And you are so worthy of having some boundaries and some healthy boundaries in your relationships with other people. And your relationships will be stronger and healthier if you do have boundaries in place in your relationships. So the big question this week, all right, yes, we should have boundaries. Yes, we're worthy of boundaries. Big question, how do we do that? How do we practically set up boundaries? And it starts here. It starts with knowing yourself. A lot of times when we think about boundaries, we think about, all right, I've got to make limits on others. But really, beginning with healthy boundaries and starting with healthy boundaries starts with knowing yourself and knowing who you are and knowing your own emotions and what your emotions are telling you about your relationships with other people. When I was in high school, I was on the JV soccer team. And we would practice during the summers. It was a little bit different than what happens now in high school sports. So we wouldn't practice all summer long. But about 2 weeks before school started, we would do 2 practices a day for like 2.5 hours a day. And so we would do practices in the morning, practices at night. And I can remember just going and just being drenched in sweat and exhausted because it was just so stinking hot in the middle of August doing 2-a-day soccer practices. And so I decided I was going to bring this with me to soccer practice. Other people brought their water bottles and they brought like the little Gatorade bottles. They would bring little cups, but not me. I was bringing the full-on Coleman to my soccer practices, filled with ice water. It was awesome. And so I can remember bringing this to soccer practice, set it on the bench by everybody else's water, and we would do our drills and we would run, and I would come back, and I wasn't the fastest guy in high school, right? And so like we would do like 5 laps, and I would not be the fastest guy, so I would get back and hot and sweaty and exhausted. I would go to grab my water, and it was empty. And I was like, what? I thought maybe it got knocked over, and some of the guys started chuckling. And I was like, what happened to my water? And they were like, oh yeah, we drank it. And I was like, what? They were like, yeah, we drank it. And there were a lot of emotions boiling up inside of me. I mean, I angry and I was frustrated and I was hot and I was tired and I was thirsty and I wasn't really sure how to react or what to do. I just had a lot of emotions, and in that moment, I didn't quite know how to handle what was going on. So often what we do is we take our emotions and we ignore them. Now, this is a pretty simple scenario. Like, I had every right to be mad about that. It wasn't one of those things where the team provided water. It was just, I was out of water. There was no water for me for this practice. I was just done for. That's a pretty obvious one where we think, yeah, you have every right to be mad. But there are situations in our lives and in our relationships that are a little bit more nuanced. And a lot of times those situations in our lives and in our relationships bring to the forefront of us emotions. And what we tend to do with those emotions is we tend to take them and kind of shove them up in a ball and stick them in a place where we don't have to think about them, we don't have to feel them, and we don't have to process what is going on. And we don't have to make a whole lot of changes. But here's the truth. Our emotions are tools. Our emotions are tools that are given to us to help us recognize inappropriate and dangerous situations and help us work through difficult times. Let me say that again, because I think this is really, really, really important for us to grasp. Our emotions are not something that we just feel and we ignore and we go on and we do whatever. Our emotions are not something that is just something that we can push aside. No, our emotions are given to us by God. And our emotions are tools. When we start to feel emotions, we can recognize that something is happening. And our emotions are tools that are given to us to help us recognize dangerous situations and harmful situations and help us work through some difficult times in our lives. When I walked over to that bench, I had a lot of emotions running through me. And those emotions were telling me something was wrong here. My soccer team should not have drank all of my water on a 90-degree day, and now I was going to have to go thirsty. That was wrong. And the emotions inside of me were telling me that. And this example, like I said earlier, is pretty obvious. But there's some other examples, like, for example, you're hanging out with a group of friends, and your friend turns to your other friends and makes a joke at your expense. All right, he was joking. But the joke went a little too far. And all your friends are laughing, and he thinks it's no big deal, but you're sitting there thinking, that cut me a little bit deeper than you intended for that to cut me. You have some emotions inside of you. You have a decision on what to do with those emotions. You can say, I'm going to ignore that. He was just joking around, not a big deal. Or you can process those emotions, and you can begin to set some boundaries with your friend. In these moments, it's where we have to understand. We have to understand ourselves and listen to our emotions so that we can clearly communicate boundaries to others. Because what happens is we ignore the joke, which if that's the situation and you want to take it that direction, that's fine. But when he jokes again, and he jokes again, and he jokes again, and you've ignored opportunities to set up healthy boundaries, problems start to arise in your relationship. But if we can validate our emotions and we can recognize ourselves, we can know us for who we are, we can begin to set up healthy boundaries. And setting boundaries with friends seems really, really difficult. Take the example of this friend that made a joke. It may be difficult to set a boundary. We're going to talk about how to do that in just a minute. It may be difficult, but guess what? Your relationship with your friend, if you can set an appropriate, healthy boundary with them, is going to be stronger and healthier in the long run if we can do that. Boundaries are super, super important. Jesus was a master at understanding his emotions. Jesus was a master at understanding his emotions and using those emotions to set appropriate boundaries with the people around him. Jesus was rightfully angry with the teachers of the law when they were putting people down and oppressing people and doing things that were against God. And he used that anger to call them out in appropriate ways to hopefully help them change, but he was setting some boundaries for the people that were around him and were his followers. Jesus was a master at his emotions. He felt love and compassion for the people that were overlooked and completely ignored. And he was the type of person that was always raising the level of people like women and children and minorities and people that were looked down upon. And you'll notice, if you read through the Gospels, you'll notice there are people that did things that were against God, that were religious leaders that should have known better, and it evoked one emotion from Jesus. And there were people that did things that were against God that they didn't quite understand, and it evoked a different emotion from Jesus. And you'll see that Jesus used these emotions to set boundaries with the people around him so that those people would be drawn in closer to him. With the religious leaders, he set firm boundaries so that they would understand something new is happening. Please get on board with it, because the direction you're headed is wrong. With tax collectors and people that were oppressed, he set boundaries with compassion and love so that they would be drawn in close to him. And he would be able to say, listen, you're headed the wrong direction. Come, join me. And we see that he was a master at understanding his emotions and being a master at knowing who he was and how he could impact the people around him. So the first step to healthy boundaries, is understanding ourselves and understanding our emotions in any given situation. First step to setting healthy boundaries. It doesn't start with saying no to somebody else. That's part of it down the road. But it starts with knowing ourselves, understanding ourselves. And if we go back to this, I just knew I was mad. But in this situation, I don't think I understood myself well enough to know what to do next. And it's so important that we understand ourselves so that we can know what we need to do next. Once you understand your emotions and you know yourself, the next step in setting healthy boundaries is this. Identify what boundary line was crossed. Identify what boundary line was crossed. What did the person do that made you uncomfortable? What did the person do that cut you a little too deep? What did the person do that you're feeling like, oh, there's just something off about that? I'm just not feeling right about this situation. We need to allow our emotions to guide us to identify boundaries. And when our boundaries are crossed, we need to allow our emotions to help us identify boundaries and when our boundaries are crossed. We have to be able to identify what happened. Where was the line crossed? How can I help the other person understand in a kind way, hey, this was too much? And so in order to understand that, we have to first understand ourselves and our emotions. Then we have to understand what boundary was crossed. And then we can do the third step. And the third step is clearly communicate to the person. This is kind of for me anyway, the more difficult one, because I am more of a people pleaser. Like, confrontation is not my thing. I'm not a big fan of going against people. And so this is the third step. You go to the person and you clearly communicate, hey, this happened, and here's how I'm feeling. In the book, you guys heard me talk about this book last week, the book Boundaries. Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend say this: your boundaries need to be made visible to others and communicated to them in relationship. Your boundaries need to be made visible to others and communicated to them in relationship. And so here's what you do. You calmly share your feelings. Calmly share your feelings with the other person and how that person contributed to those feelings, and how keeping a boundary can help you feel safer and help the relationship be healthier. All right, I want to say that again because there was a lot to that. Calmly share your feelings with the other person. Let's stop right there. Calmly share your feelings with the other person. Let's use the example of the joke that we made earlier, right? Timmy, come on up here on stage. All right, I used Timmy last week. We're going to use Timmy again this week. He made a great suggestion in our leader meeting that I use more people on stage. All right, so here's how we would typically respond to someone making a joke at our expense. Timmy, make a joke.
Why did the chicken cross the road?
Why?
Because he was trying to get to the other side.
Make it at my expense, though.
I don't know.
Say, you're short.
You're short.
All right. Now, typically, here's how we respond, right? If we're feeling a lot of emotions and we're angry, be like, dude, you're a jerk. All right, stop right there. Because here's what we need to do. What we tend to do is express ourselves and say, you are, or I feel that you are a mean guy because you made fun of my height. When what we should do is express our emotions. There's a difference, because if I said to Timmy, dude, you know, I feel really unloved when you make fun of my height. You may not know this, but like as a kid, I stopped growing and that was a big deal to me. Now, Timmy's reaction to you're a jerk versus I feel unloved, completely different, right? All right, give Timmy a hand. Good job. Thank you, Timmy. Thank you. Good suggestion in our leader meeting, calling people up on stage. Excellent, excellent. But here's the thing is we tend to say, I feel that you are fill in the blank. If we're going to set some healthy boundaries, we have to explain to the person not who they are, we have to explain to the person who we are. I feel hurt. I feel unloved. I feel uncomfortable. I feel angry. You start there and you calmly express the emotions that you are feeling to the other person. And then you express how they contributed to that emotion. Let's use a different example. You've got that person that, like, when they talk to you, like they're right here, right? They're just all in your face, all in your business, and you're like, I'm not a close talker. Just take a step back. And what we tend to do is we tend to be like, ugh, right? But if we could calmly go to the person and be like, dude, I love talking to you, but I feel a little uncomfortable when someone stands super close to me, and like you tend to stand a little close. I want to talk to you. Can you just take a step back? You've clearly communicated you feel uncomfortable, and that you've clearly communicated the person did something to initiate those feelings inside of you. how you can set a boundary. Now, it doesn't mean you want to cut off that person forever. It doesn't mean you never want to talk to that person again. You may really enjoy talking to that person. It's just that you would be able to have a healthier conversation, a better conversation with that person if they were a few feet away from you and not right in your face where you could feel their spittle on your cheek every time you talk, right? And so what we do is we calmly express our own emotions, and then we express to that person how our relationship can be healthier. We set a boundary. And our goal is that our relationships would be healthier. Setting boundaries is not about cutting people off. Setting boundaries is not about pushing people away. Now, next week, we're going to talk about what happens when people don't respect your boundaries and how we handle that. And then there is a time to put distance and space there. But boundaries at their core, the goal of setting boundaries is to say, hey, here's my boundary line. I want you to be a part of my life in a healthy way. And I'm going to respect your boundaries, and I want you to respect my boundaries. When I'm around you, I want to feel loved. When I'm around you, I want to feel comfortable. When I'm around you, I want to feel safe. I don't want to feel like you're going to tear me down all the time. And so we set these boundaries and we express our emotions to our friends in the hopes that our relationships will actually be healthier. In Matthew 16, we see Jesus setting a boundary with one of the people that he is closest to, the Apostle Peter. Check this out. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he had to go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders, chief priests, and legal experts, and that he had to be killed and raised on the third day. Then Peter took a hold of Jesus and, scolding him, began to correct him. God forbid, Lord, this won't happen to you. But he turned to Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stone that could make me stumble, for you are not thinking God's thoughts, but humans' thoughts." Now, first things first. Jesus' response, "Get behind me, Satan." Every time I've read this, I'm like, dude, Jesus, that was a little bit harsh. Like, you're calling Peter Satan. That is, and like I always pictured it as like this angry, forceful, like, dude, get behind me, Satan, right? Okay, so I did a little research this week. I'm not going to go into all of the heavy details of it, but when you look in the original Greek, what you'll notice is the tone of Jesus was a tone that expressed that he was hurt. It was a tone of sorrow. It wasn't anger. It wasn't like, dude, Peter, back up off it. It was like, Peter, you hurt me. And this whole idea of get behind me, Satan, it's really hard to translate into English because he's actually talking to two people at once. He's talking to Peter and he's talking to Satan both at the same time. And the Greek words like translate weirdly. But what he's actually saying in a sorrowful tone is, Satan, you belong out of my life. Be gone completely. Peter, you're not the leader. You belong as my follower. You're going to do great things as my follower. I'm setting this boundary right now. I've got to be the leader. Come with me. Jump in behind me and follow me. Let's do this thing together because this is going to be bigger and bolder and larger than you could ever imagine. Jesus set a boundary. And Peter went on to follow Jesus to his death. And he would start the local church. And he would die for Jesus. because he was aware, if I want to be in the best relationship with Jesus that I can be in, I've got to be his follower. I can't be the one in charge. And it's this beautiful depiction of setting boundaries, and this healthy boundary that was set where Jesus did not just ignore the fact that Peter was taking control. Jesus just explains, Peter, you can't. And their relationship was strengthened and healthier. And you will see Jesus do this with Peter over and over and over again, where he sets different boundaries. And he does this with everybody in his life. He sets these boundaries to make his relationship with others the way that they were intended to be. We can do that too. We can set some boundaries. We can set some healthy boundaries in our lives that make our relationship with others the way that they were intended to be. And so when we think about how do we set boundaries, 3 steps. Know yourself. Understand your emotions. It starts there. Don't shove them aside. Don't ignore them. Don't blow them off. Process them. Understand them. Really dig in and allow yourself to feel them. Understand what line was crossed. Figure out what boundary was crossed. What was it about what happened that made you feel the way that you feel, that made you uncomfortable, that made you sad, that made you feel unloved? What was it? And then clearly and calmly communicate that to your friend. And the goal is that your friend will look at you and say, I get that. I can do that. I can work on that. It doesn't mean your friend is going to be perfect every single day and every single time. You might have to remind them of their boundary, but as long as we can see effort and work, we can say, man, that's a good, healthy relationship. And that's our goal. So next week, we're going to talk about what happens when friends don't necessarily abide by our boundaries. But for this week, we'll just stop right here. And the practical challenge is this. Which one of these do you need to work on? This week, I want you to pick the one that's the most difficult and begin thinking about that, praying about that, and working on setting some healthy boundaries with your friends. Let me pray for you. God, thank you so much for tonight and the chance to be here.